Welcome back to another episode of Make Me Data Literate. I'm excited this time to be able to bring you a guest that I pounced on at the Science Misinformation Symposium a few weeks ago. I couldn't resist the opportunity to ask him to be a guest. So this is going to be a really fun conversation. Welcome, Professor Sutton.
Thanks, Linda. Please call me Brett.
Okay, I will. Thanks, Brett. I think this is going to be a super interesting conversation. So let's start with, who are you and what do you do?
Sure. Brett Sutton. I am currently Director of Health and Biosecurity, which is a research unit in CSIRO, Australia's National Science Agency. So I lead a team of 350 or thereabouts, and they're involved in research across health and biosecurity domains.
What does that look like day to day? So that's a heck of a large team.
It is a big team. So yeah, look, there's the usual administrative management responsibilities. So a lot of the day is taken up in that routine work, if you like. But obviously we carve out appropriately the bits where we're either reflecting on our operational needs and refining elements there, or reflecting on the strategic direction that we're taking and thinking about where we make investments, where we might dial things up or down accordingly. So, it's got the usual spectrum of the routine and then the stewardship towards a strategic area of focus.
So what kind of things does health and biosecurity cover?
Well, biosecurity is really the full spectrum: plant, environmental, agricultural, animal and human biosecurity. So it's all things in relation to keeping Australia secure from invasive species or invasive pests, and what that means in terms of consequences for the environment, consequences for animal health, consequences for human health. So that's everything from invasive viruses, invasive species that can threaten those sectors, but also the zoonotic diseases that are a risk to humans as well. So there's also a focus on those high consequence diseases that can impact human health.
So you folks would be on high alert with the bird flu situation.
Yeah, there's a separate research unit called AAL, Australian Animal Health Laboratory, is the name of the research unit. They're down at Geelong in the now named Australian Centre for Disease Preparedness, and they're obviously focused on doing all of the in-depth testing that's required for bird flu to confirm the cases that are initially suspected or reported, as we know from Western Australia and South Australia. But anything else that will come in that requires that kind of high-level expert confirmatory testing.
That's I don't want to get into that one because I've been looking at the news and being alarmed by it. But good to know you folks are on the case.
Yeah, and look, it's a big challenge for Australia, and obviously threatens both wild bird and other bird industry populations. But we've kind of seen it coming for some time, and we knew that we were the last continent to be unaffected, and so there's been a long lead time in terms of preparation, and we're now in response mode.
That gives me some comfort. You deal with the threats even once they're here? It's not like you're trying to keep them out of our borders, but once they're inside, it's out of your hands, like fire ants or things like that?
No. We certainly respond to things that are post-border incursions and are problematic as new invasive species or pests. And so some of our technologies are absolutely applied to the mitigation or control or hopefully eradication in some instances of those invasive species. But it's always pretty challenging once it's gotten to an established state, and we continue to try and apply the innovations and technologies that can keep it under wraps. But these are complex things, and obviously movement across borders and the vast continent that Australia is means that sometimes controlling and mitigating the impacts is the best that we can do, rather than elimination in full.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you've had a really impressive career. How much of what you learnt in your formal education has, how much of what you need in your day-to-day job did you learn in your formal education? How much was on-the-job training?
Look, there was probably not a great deal in formal education. I'm sure I'm not the first person to have told you that. I wish
No,
there were more that related to navigating complexity and understanding the kind of wicked problems that we face nowadays. The world was simpler, when I was in high school in the 80s, and the problems that we face now have multiple levels. They are system problems. They are wicked in the true sense of the word, in as much as they don't have single solutions, and they can't be overcome with a single innovation or a single intervention. They require all things together to be working, and that goes from the potential technological innovations that might apply to them, but also to the policy, regulatory, legislative settings, and then of course to the human behavioural elements as well, which is as complex as all the rest put together. So I don't think I even really scratched the surface of that in formal education. That was very much on the job training, and obviously my time as Chief Health Officer and Chief Human Biosecurity Officer in Victoria was on the job training for crisis management, crisis leadership, crisis communication, and a lot of that gets applied in normal times as well, in terms of managing that complexity.
Yeah, I imagine that the level of on-the-job training you got during 2020 and the subsequent years was unexpectedly intense.
Yeah, it was. It was obviously, in the crucible of crisis, and very, very challenging for everyone who was involved. But there wouldn't be anyone who didn't say that they learned a great deal and got some refinement of skills and experience by virtue of going through it. That does include how to manage all of those things happening at once, how to navigate the nuanced communication of those challenges, and how to manage big teams. The team that I was involved in grew to over 3,000, and there's a lot to make sure that that's focused in terms of its strategic priorities and its operational focus.
Yeah, next level challenge. We saw during that time that people's understanding of, for example, exponential growth is not what we might wish it to be, or it wasn't then. I think it improved sharply at the time. Is there any one thing that would make your life a lot easier, that you think the world would be better if people understood just this one thing about data?
I don't know that there's any one thing, because it isn't one thing. I think, maybe the understanding is that it can be all things. It can be your best friend, it can be your worst enemy. And, but maybe it's that there's a specific and nuanced and complex set of skills to navigate it, understand it, transmit and communicate it, that is required. That you can look at it and think that it's straightforward, but there'll always be a more nuanced story behind it. Sometimes it's straightforward. Sometimes it's just a case of very simple transmission of numbers that represent something very straightforward and very linear. But at other times, there are all of these other layers that you need to understand. And I think, so maybe if there's one thing, it's that you shouldn't make an assumption that what you see before you is exactly how it might be representing itself or how it might be represented to you, and that you should call on the expertise of epidemiologists and bioinformaticians and biostatisticians and other experts in the field to help explain that in a way that is, understandable and digestible, but it's not always straightforward, and that you do need to give it the space to be able to say, well, what is the story behind this, and how best can I understand some of the complexity behind the data.
I love that. I did a workshop on Friday with some teachers on measurement, and I gave them a graph, which was actually the solar output from our solar system over 3 years. And I said, tell me the stories that this graph tells you, but then also give me 3 other reasons why the graph might be showing what it's showing. Like the idea that what we think we see in the graph isn't necessarily what's there. You can say that one peak is higher than another, but you can't say why from the data itself, which is something we tend to forget. It's easy to get caught up in a particular narrative, especially if it's pushed really hard.
Yeah, that's right. Things get presented for particular reasons, and everybody needs to take a step back and make sure that they've got either themselves the appropriate skills to interrogate and ask sensible questions. But we should all expect that we've got the ability to call on either the expertise to be able to help navigate that, or that we can have it ourselves, but we don't get it like that overnight. And if we're going to have an appropriate understanding, we know that really complex data, or data that is representative of really complex phenomena, will need that special expertise in order to navigate it.
You must have some pretty strong feelings at this point about armchair experts.
Of course there are frustrating elements. Of course there are ways in which armchair experts may not have helped with understanding data at different times. At the same time, I'm deeply aware that people have a right to understand things that are affecting them personally and affecting us at scale, and have deep implications for how we live our lives, and the settings that we have to move through in a policy sense, and they've got an entitlement to understand either what it all means, or why it can't be explained in a 30-second radio soundbite or an 8-second TV grab, because oftentimes it's the presentation of that data through those compressed and restricted opportunities that make it really difficult. I think the deepest frustrations I've had with data are probably around cherry picking. Oh, there was this one thing that was said about it without the broader context, and it's the broader context that means absolutely everything. Yeah. And it's not to say that people are wrong in responding to what they get. It's to say that we should all do our best to create the time and space to be able to look at all of that complexity and nuance where it's present. And
to communicate it effectively.
Absolutely. And look, there are mistakes I've made there. There are mistakes that everyone makes at whatever points. But it's with the best of intentions that people try and navigate this stuff. But it's worth all of us reflecting on the fact that it's not straightforward sometimes, that it has just layers and layers of all the biases that it can be subject to, all of the confounding, all of the errors in measurement and interpretation that can occur as well.
Yeah, I love that message that there's I always say there's no such thing as a perfect data set, but there's also no such thing as a perfect analysis or one true analysis. There are so many different ways to approach a data set, and it's really important that we don't get too invested in believing one track before we've thoroughly tested it.
Indeed, although, and I've quoted this commentator, philosopher before, H.L. Mencken, who said, for every complex problem, there is a solution which is clear, simple, and wrong. And, he's getting to the point that people can get quite attached to that simple narrative because they don't have to deal with the complex reality that's in front of them. But it's wrong. And so, take the time and leave the space for that complex answer with all of the caveats and all of the nuances and all of the differing interpretations that others might come to it with, because that's closer to the truth, quote unquote, than a straightforward, simple and wrong answer.
Yeah. I mean, complex is difficult and messy and a lot of work, and the simple is very attractive.
Indeed. Wouldn't we all wish the world thus?
Yes, yeah, 100%. Are there things that data shows, or that you can see in data, that you wish more people knew about?
I think there are times when data collection, data analysis, and all of the curation and collation that happens behind the scenes comes together in analysis which is deeply illustrative, that it tells a really important new story. And I think it doesn't happen frequently, but I think there are occasions when data can bring you to absolutely new and powerful insights, either by virtue of where data has been drawn from and brought together in a way that hasn't happened before, or it's gone through the time and care and complexity to allow for an analysis that brings you to really important new insights. Now, that can happen in all kinds of areas across, the full spectrum of social and health and medical and other sciences, but it can be incredibly informative in those regards. And I think I recall insight into the harms of gambling in Australia. That was a new analysis that had been done with data that was at a bigger scale, with greater data linkage than had happened previously across jurisdictions, across age groups, and with socio-demographic data that hadn't been linked at that level before. And it was illustrative of the deep harms that happen for a very substantial proportion of people who gamble. And it allows you to set aside the simple narratives that you might otherwise hear, that it's only the X% of problem gamblers who are really impacted, or it doesn't have these harms at a population level. It was very clear that it was deeply harmful to the problem gamblers, but it was pretty damn harmful for a substantial proportion of the population. And you can't just set it aside with, again, the simple narrative that might come from those who would want to present it differently. The gaming sector in the US was well known for saying, we're building a gaming centre or a casino in your town, but guess what? We built 3 playgrounds and a kindergarten. Now that's a simple and wrong narrative, because that was built on the back of a whole bunch of bankruptcies that were not visible. And so bringing these real phenomena and consequences to life is very powerful and very important.
Yeah, I saw a snippet of Sean McAuliffe's gambling documentary recently, where he talked to someone who runs, I can't remember the town it was in, but someone who runs one of those, a bowling club it was, where they had got rid of the pokies, and they'd been, everyone told them they couldn't do it, and you have to have pokies, and they subsidise all the rest of it. And they were like, I'm not sure that subsidising people's food off the backs of, people gambling and losing all their money is actually the right thing to do. And they found that it turned out, to have massive social benefits, not just for the club, but for the community around them. It's always nice to see those corporate narratives overturned when they're manipulated like that.
And data shines a light on that stuff, doesn't it? It gives the granularity and the depth of understanding of those phenomena that you might otherwise not see and therefore dismiss.
Yeah, that's right. I interviewed David Spriggs from Info Exchange late last year, and they have a platform where people can search for services nearby, whether they need food or housing or medical support or whatever it is they need. They can search for it on this platform, and the searches plummeted during the pandemic, during the lockdowns, when they raised the rate, basically when they lifted welfare payments above the poverty line. And then the week before they put it back, the demand for services massively increased again. And it was just such a neat and impossible to argue with illustration of what happens when you give people enough to live on. I mean, it's weird that you need evidence of that, but sometimes the evidence is really clear.
It can quantify the benefit. It can make real those positive impacts for sure.
Yeah, that's right. Which can be really powerful. Not always powerful enough, but can be really powerful.
Indeed.
What are the worst data mistakes that you've seen?
Look, I think it's probably in the interpretation, and it's not. Again, it's not a critique of people who are trying to make sense of things that are presented in an overly decontextualized way, but it's where something is presented and the questions haven't been asked and the presentation hasn't been given of all of the weaknesses, caveats, methodological biases that are at play. And and it can literally provide an opposite outcome, an opposite analysis than might have been presented. When that's deliberate in order to support a narrative, that's particularly frustrating. But I wouldn't put that in the category of mistake. I think mistakes are made when someone hasn't gone to the with the care and attention that is required to understand the complexity of certain data interpretations and analyses. Whether it's survivorship bias, whether it's the healthcare seeking bias, or the healthy vaccinee bias, or the seeking testing bias, all of those things can remain hidden unless someone knows to look for them or knows to call them out as a potential bias at play. And I think they're sometimes hugely problematic for the results as they're presented, because they literally change what you should make of those results, and that happens all too often. I mean, obviously, we can be focused on analyses that have gone through a robust peer review process and have had that methodological robustness interrogated in full. Even then, it can get through the cracks, or it can still be open to all of those challenges. But those really good studies, they're upfront about the limitations. They're upfront about the fact that this methodology was applied because it was a practical and feasible consideration, or that it was most appropriate in these circumstances. But there are other occasions where it's simply presented and no one has asked the tough questions of that methodology or of the data, and that can literally be then grabbed by everyone who has that pre-existing desire to see that particular outcome presented, and then amplified in ways that can get away from us.
Yeah, and even where the methodology is properly and realistically presented, that doesn't always translate into the headlines that result, and the stories that are written based on that.
And science journalism is more important now than at any other time. And there was probably a simpler world in which journalism presented the science, and it was relatively more simple and more straightforward. We're now in an era where if it's just a little bit tempting to distort for dramatic effect, and let's face it, everyone's a journalist now, and so it'll come through in someone's blog or be presented in someone's podcast, and bless you for talking to the nuance and complexity and all of these issues, but there are those who would just present it straight out with the distortions because they've got great dramatic effect, and that's a huge problem nowadays.
Yeah, I saw. I think the Australia Institute did a takedown of Pauline Hanson's recent quote about the number of the Australian population who don't speak English, or don't speak it well, and it turned out she'd included babies. Among many other issues, she'd included babies. But I liked the way you talked about, you mentioned seeking testing bias, and it reminds me of the classic genetics result that I learnt about when I was doing genetics back, as my son says, when dinosaurs roamed the earth. They told us that when genetic testing is done, 10% of people turn out not to have the fathers they thought they had. And that was before, anyone could just do a genetic test by getting a pack sent to them online. But it completely...
and these... It's the suspicious person bias, right?
Exactly, right. It's like the people who have doubts are the ones who get it tested. And so obviously there's a much higher... it's surprising in actual fact that... of the people who have doubts, only 10% of those are confirmed in those suspicions, which is
exactly.
It's the same data but a completely different presentation.
Yeah, and these are the people who have blue eyes and both of their parents have brown eyes, or they can roll their tongue like this and their parents can't, or some other inherited characteristic. I'm O negative, but my parents are both. Rhesus positive, these are the things that prompt individuals, and so it's in that interpretation that you have to take care. Absolutely.
Yeah, it comes back to context, doesn't it? You when you look at the raw data, it doesn't tell you the whole picture.
Indeed.
We talked about data being deliberately misused. What do you look for when you're looking at things in the media, or they come across your desk at work? How do you spot the ones where you go, I'm not sure this is quite what we're looking at?
Yeah, look, I guess there's legacy media or mainstream media that is different from social media presentations. In mainstream media, I would... I'm working on the assumption that they are trying to present it in a way that is factual and is appropriately representative, sometimes with a tendency towards dramatic effect, but not trying to make very deliberate distortions. And so in those circumstances, I think the appropriate questions to ask and the appropriate things to look for are what is missing here. And sometimes it's on an axis in terms of, giving a full representation of what those figures are. Sometimes it's literally looking for where the source is, what period of time it relates to, what population it relates to, what the methodology might be behind this. And oftentimes that's available, or you can go to a link that allows you to see what the source data is and what the fuller picture is. But yeah, it's really asking the question around what is not being presented here and what can I not see in this, because the graph is one thing, it's telling a story, but it is one little chunk of a much bigger, broader and more nuanced context. in the world of social media, I would say question everything. I mean, there is obviously a need for a civic uplift in our understanding about how to interrogate all of that, but it does relate to what is the source and how might I trust or not trust that source. Don't just take it as valuable because it's been shared by a member of your own family or your circle of friends or circle of Facebook mates or whatever. But there are also all of those danger signs. You know, it's come to me urgent, caps, all caps, and someone's speaking in a video and they're all very emotional and agitated. Now they're not inappropriate at times, but you have to ask the question, why is this being presented in some massively dramatic way? Ask yourself the question, is that the emotional hook that someone's trying to reel me in on in order to engage with this? And, the story of social media nowadays is that it's all about the attention economy. And in fact, it's about the attraction economy to hook you in and keep you there. And, short video feeds are the primary mechanism of engagement with our youth now, and I think it's it's a pretty depressing landscape in terms of information sharing, because telling a story which is a little bit more boring because it's longer and needs detail and has no great dramatic, drum roll conclusion. Isn't going to get a 15-year-old on TikTok, and so that's something to challenge now. But I think it's an enormous challenge to overcome because it's literally built into algorithms and the monetization of that data and the monetization of that engagement on those platforms. And so they're not really interested in the long, nuanced and somewhat duller story. That's the reality.
We don't quite know isn't great clickbait.
Correct.
The big secret no one's telling you about this. The secret is we don't understand it.
That's the danger sign to look for. They're trying to hide it from you.
I realised when I was preparing for the last episode of this podcast where I interviewed Ketan Joshi about AI data centres and stuff, I realised that those red flags you're talking about, the urgency and the all caps and that, you've got to get on board, you don't want to miss out, those are scam red flags, and it's absolutely the way the AI industry and the data centres are being marketed to us. I was interested to hear you say that you assumed when you were dealing with legacy media that they were trying to tell a factual story. That's not where I thought you were going. Maybe that's because I'm overly cynical, a little bit paranoid these days. But do you not feel that, trying not to put you terribly on the spot, but do you not feel that mainstream media suffers from the same kind of pressures, the need to get clicks and also, often an agenda to push?
Yeah, there's no question they're feeling that pressure, and it's a commercial pressure. So they need engagement, and they're competing with platforms that are driving that engagement, kind of without moral or ethical constraints in many respects. That said, there are voluntary codes of practice that apply, and there are ways in which they constrain themselves as with industry standards that put them in a different category, I think. That is not to say that they're not being challenged, and it's not to say that bad practices don't come to the fore, but I think there is a little bit of there is a little bit of hope in that they are also wanting to differentiate themselves from that social media pig slop, as I like to call it, because they want to be able to say this information is coming to you in a different way for a different reason. It's coming to you because we are wanting to differentiate ourselves in terms of the way that we apply some rigour into the storytelling that we do, the information and fact checking that we do, and so it's not universal. It doesn't apply to everything that you ever see. There's no question that there are commercial and financial pressures that apply to mainstream media, but I do think there will be, and there is, also pushback on what people are exposed to through social media, and they are saying, it might be my main form of engagement, it might be 3 hours of my screen time a day compared to 10 minutes of watching ABC News, but they are also appropriately sceptical of that feed, and so hopefully there's a little bit of a swing back of the pendulum to say, I just need some assurance about what is real in the world and what I can trust in terms of information sources. And so people do differentiate. People say, this might be appealing. Yes, I spent some time looking at these feeds, but I also don't trust them as much as I would trust our national broadcaster or those who would apply a voluntary code of conduct.
Yeah, I have concerns about voluntary codes of conduct, but perhaps there are more consequences, more accountability in the mainstream media, a little more, not as much perhaps as we might like, but...
Yeah, and look, obviously the ABC applies a charter and takes it very seriously and has independent review processes. So, they're not all the same in the mainstream media space either. And
that's true.
People need to think about that in terms of where they're getting their information from.
I feel like we could not fix the social media problem, but it could be a lot less problematic if we simply legislated the algorithm away. Just make it chronological. It's still an algorithm, but legislate the engagement metrics away and just go, you can't do that anymore. It
is a tricky space, and we're dealing with companies that have revenue that exceeds Australia's GDP, so it's not an easy or symmetrical power play. No,
I think that's a really important point that we tend to forget, that asymmetrical. The power is largely on one side, and that's really problematic. So we wind up legislating people instead of legislating platforms. And say,
indeed, and it's tricky, and it applies to us at an individual level as well. We would all be better off if we had a deeper understanding of what we are giving over when we get on platforms in terms of the data that we are sharing, willingly or unwillingly, or knowingly or unknowingly. And I think that's also problematic, that all of that data is used, and it's used for commercial gain against us, if you like.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have... I didn't warn you about this question, so you can ignore it if you want to, but do you have any positive uses of social media yourself? Are there things you like it for? I like it for cat videos and otters and things like that.
Yeah, look, for me nowadays it's mostly entertainment or humour. I don't tend to go to it for trusted sources of information or factual interrogation, because it's largely, it might be there, but you've got to sort through, tons of chaff to get to the wheat, and that's really tricky. So, by and large, I won't go there for facts, but it's good for the jokes. Your point about having to sort through tons of chaff reminds me of something that we learnt at the Misinformation Symposium, which is that repetition of a bit of misinformation makes it more plausible even to people who are disinclined to believe it. So if you repeat climate misinformation, even to someone who is on board with climate action and believes in climate change and understands the issues and stuff, just the sheer repetition can
have a powerful impact on your willingness to believe something, and that's a little terrifying.
It is, but that's how it's working. That volume wins over quality and integrity, and maybe that's maybe that goes to some deep evolutionary element of what it means to be human. That you want that sense of belonging in tribe or in social group, and if you see something repeated again and again, it becomes more and more challenging to be the person on the outer, and so either unconsciously or consciously you'll have a sense that you should go with the flow, but that's that comes with its own dangers, obviously.
Yeah. I find that with AI, a lot of my work is pushing back against the AI hype and trying to highlight what it can and can't do. There was an article I saw today, a study on the use of AI in health and the number of errors, potentially catastrophic errors that were made, which lined up with what I've been saying. But there's so much hype and so many people going, it's the best thing, it's so great, it's amazing, and you start to go, am I nuts? Like, have I just missed it? Like, do I not get it? And then you see some other error and you're like, no, I'm but the repetition really it is weirdly powerful.
And AI talks with the confidence of a middle-aged man, and so sounds very convincing because there's no doubt. It's like, yes, this is how it is. And I, just last week I was trying to dig down to where my grandmother's middle name came from, and I couldn't work out whether it was her mother's maiden name, which it isn't, her grandmother's maiden name, or her great-grandmother's maiden name. And I was trying to work out whether it might have been an association with a well-known family in Bendigo when my great-grandfather came over with the gold rush from Cornwall, or whether it was actually on the maternal grandparent side. And I asked AI one way and got, yes, it's related to association with this famous family in Bendigo. And then I asked it a different way and it said, no, it absolutely isn't. It relates to, the maternal lineage, and this is why. And so, both confidently presented and sounds very convincing, but you've just, it's grain of salt stuff. You've got to take it with a grain of salt. Yeah.
And we're not really well set up to do that psychologically. It's not the default. The default is we're quite accepting and believing people sort of at bottom. I think you have to really work to build that skepticism.
Indeed, it's AI getting to that level where it's very hard to differentiate from someone very familiar to us. Sounds like normal human conversation, and of course we're going to anthropomorphize to the extent that we think there's sentience and emotion and connection behind all of that.
Yep, definitely. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for your willingness to be involved. We come to our last question, which is my favourite. What excites you about data?
Oh, I think I've said it already probably, but it's the ability to reveal new things and through that telling of a story bring us to new insights that hopefully mean something to us in the world, that is a revelation about us as human beings, is a revelation about society, about the fascinating world we live in. There is so much out there that is yet to be discovered, but there is also a whole bunch of stuff that is yet to be fully understood, and it's in data that gets us to new understandings that can be fascinating and exciting and revelatory. And I think I think that's the magic of it all.
I love that. That's a beautiful note to end on. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been wonderful.
Pleasure. Thanks, Linda.